Hello, everyone. My name is Anidora. I'm the podcast producer for What Is Your Story? On today's episode, we meet a young lady, Mofiyinfoluwa O, who shares her journey to celibacy. Just like any young woman, Mufi always wanted to feel wanted. She always wanted to be desired. And not in this dramatic way, but in this familiar way that I think a lot of women do. To feel pretty enough, to feel good enough, to feel desired enough. So at a very early age, in secondary school, Mufi started bleaching her skin. She started saying yes to relationships that gave her the kind of attention that felt like love, even when it really wasn't. Years later, Mufi is diagnosed with endometriosis, and in her journey to recovery, she gets very close to God in her faith. And in her healing, she made a choice that surprised even her. It was not an easy choice, but it was one she felt she needed to make. Mufi decided to become celibate. Now, this story is not one of those good girl turns pure. It's more like I finally decided to stop betraying myself type of story. Because sometimes I think as people in general, we don't realize that addiction isn't always drugs or alcohol. Sometimes it looks like chasing people who don't like you. It looks like ignoring your own suffering just for validation. Mufi's story is soft, it's vulnerable, it's messy, but overall everything, it's brave. If Mofiyinfoluwa's story resonates with you and you have an experience that you would like to share, let us know by signing up in the description form below. Alright, I'll let you guys listen to it and let us know how you feel in the comment section.
You are now listening to an episode of What Is Your Story by Noisy Podcast. Enjoy!
My name is Mofiyinfoluwa O, and this is my story. As a writer, I'm someone who is incredibly concerned with the interiority of our lives. That's the part of us that is hidden inside, that it's often not seen with the naked eye. I'm particularly interested in this for women's lives when I think of how we become the women that we are, what shapes us, especially what shapes our desires. How do we become women who want certain things and don't want certain things? How did I become someone who sought so much safety and a sense of self from romantic relationships with men? How did I become someone who found it difficult to be by myself? Ultimately, nobody has desires that are unfounded or that exist divorced from their developments as a person. I'm very obsessed with roots and with fruits and all the kind of agricultural metaphors, but something you'll never see is a fruit just hanging in the air by itself. Fruits are connected to branches, to stems, to leaves, to trunks, to roots. And so a question that I ask myself, and one that is so central to my story as a woman, is what is at the root of my desire? This is what I'm currently exploring as I'm writing my debut memoir, My Body Broken for You, in which I look very closely at my 13-year-old self, my 15-year-old self, somewhere deep in Osun State in Olashere, becoming the girl that was always writing letters, receiving letters, making googly eyes at boys, kissing boys in certain corners. How did my understandings of desire form? They form primarily, first and foremost, from reading books like Twilight. I'm obsessed with Twilight. And all the time I would read about Bella and Edward and about him staring at her in the night as she was sleeping and how he loved her so much that even though the smell of her blood was burning his throat, he just needed to be close to her. And I digested somewhere in my heart that this is what love was supposed to feel like, this all-consuming emotion where it's like everything in you has to be on fire. And my first ever boyfriend really affirmed all of that for me. I grew up with significant self-esteem issues like so many of us, just utterly convinced beyond any shadow of doubt that I was ugly. I was not happy with how my hair looked or with how my skin looked. I'd made such concerted efforts to modify my body. I tried unsuccessfully to bleach my skin. I was constantly concerned about my hair. And so when this senior boy, when I was in SS1, he was in SS2, he was like, I like you, be my girlfriend. I was like, what? I became so obsessed with the feeling of being chosen, with the feeling of a man looking at you and saying, I want you. And I became wedded to that taste on my tongue. I was like, I always want this. I always want to be on the receiving end of this kind of feeling. And then that was how I became and moved through life as a teenager. I think that a lot of young girls are very obsessed with how they present, and it's because desirability is such a core aspect of how you move through the world, how you are perceived. James Baldwin said that people make you pay for how you look. I'm misquoting that in some way, but there is a quote like that. And when we're in secondary school, there were all these hierarchies: top 10 finest girls, top 10 finest boys. And my name was never on the list. Who are the babes with their names on the list? All the light-skinned girls, or the slim girls, or the girls with long hair that they will always use for their shuku and bays that will cover the side of their eye like this. I had short hair. My hair stood at the nape of my neck, and I had natural hair, so it wouldn't even fall down stylishly. And when I started to bleach my skin, all I wanted was ultimately to be light-skinned and to be chosen. I didn't even think it through very well. I was just like, okay, this is the cream, Extreme Glow. It was expensive cream. And I used it consistently for a while, but my skin just wouldn't let up into that even lightness that I wanted. What actually happened was that my skin became a cacophony of color: patches of yellow in one corner, patches of a slightly lighter brown, just yama, anyhow discoloration. And girls used to do this a lot in school. I knew girls in my secondary school that were using Phombax A to bleach. They were like, oh, if you use it for your pimples, certain patches of your skin will get lighter. People were always so worried about being left out in the sun. We were always straightening our hair, straightening, perming, putting this one, putting that one. We were so concerned with our appearance, and I don't think anybody can convince me that we were doing it entirely for ourselves. I think there was such a strong, even subconsciously at that time, such a strong inner working that we were tampering with our appearances this much so that we would be liked and be desired and be seen. Ultimately, that desire to be seen propels a lot of us in ways we're not even aware of, and it certainly propelled me. And so as a 15, 16-year-old, in SS2, me and my boyfriend, we used to call us Bizzle and Fizzle. We're like the Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt of our secondary school. And I felt on top of the world. Not only was I so happy to be in this relationship, I was also happy to be perceived as a babe that was in a relationship with a senior guy. It wasn't just the relationship itself. It was that perception of me through the eyes of people that, this girl is so fine that this guy wants to be with her. But even within that relationship, as beautiful as it was to me at the time, there was an unspoken, sort of spoken agreement that it came with doing quite a lot of physical stuff. We used to call it gives. And it just involves, you guys know gives now, you're in the corner, you're kissing, you're touching, all these kind of things. And it seemed like it was a daily requirement of my relationship. It was something that I did frequently, and something that it seemed like the relationship could not exist without. It was like, this person likes me so much, it's better I show up and give them this thing every day so that they can remain with me. I was beginning to learn that physical pleasure was a tool that I could use to keep men interested in me. And that singular thought process was a seed. It was a seed that would nestle itself deep in the core of my being and would bear so many different kind of many rotten fruits as I would grow older and become a woman who could not conceive of her identity without tying very closely to being an object of sexual pleasure. And so when Bizzle and I eventually broke up because he was graduating, I was still in school. I finally went to school in the UK for my bachelor's in law, and I was just obsessed with being perceived as sexual and hot. I remember my 18th birthday, and all I was obsessed with was, I'm turning 18. I am now a woman. I can now do whatever I like with my body. It was such a consuming mindset from me, where I was like, this is what it means to be a woman, to be somebody that can decide that, yes, I want to have sex just because I want to have sex. I didn't really grow up hearing, keep yourself for your husband, or my home was not one that was run over with like purity culture or any of the kind of harmful messaging around women's bodies that tends to impute a lot of fear and distrust in themselves. So I wasn't fearful of that in that way. And I had very relaxed siblings. Like, I remember the first time that I had sex, my sister took me for a pina colada in a hotel after. It was like, well, and she asked me all the questions. Did you use protection? Are you being safe? Do you need plan B? Like, she was very, very direct with me. And she had this realistic understanding of young women engaging desire and taking care of themselves within that. And even that was another seed that would save my life, years down the line. But by the time I was 18, I was convinced that being a sexual being was the most important thing about me. It shaped how I dressed. It shaped my entire social media presence. It shaped the kind of pictures I posted on Twitter. And the sudden desirability that came with me turning 18, no more the secondary school girl with the funny looking hair. I learned how to dress for myself. Me and Pretty Little Thing were locked in. Every day it was jumpsuits, cleavage, booty. I was just like, I became like a different person, and the attention came rushing in. My Twitter followers were climbing, my DMs were always popping. I was in such demand, and that sudden desirability, it rushed to my head, and I started seeing so many men in Lagos. I was just feeling on top of the world. And by the time I got into a relationship that summer, the summer I turned 18, it had cemented in my brain that sex was what you used to get and keep men. And sex was what you used to feel like a woman, to feel in touch with yourself and in touch with your body. And whenever I like something, I'm obsessed with it. I have a very obsessive tendency. And so because I liked sex so much, I read all about it, watched all about it, was constantly reading about it, was constantly exploring things, was constantly talking to people about it. And so I kind of like got a reputation on Twitter for being this very sexually forward young woman. And I was proud of it in some way. It made me feel really knowledgeable, really worldly. It made me feel like such a badass. And that was essentially how I continued for most of my early 20s.
Are you enjoying this episode so far? If you love stories that make you feel at home and you love reading December love stories, check out our anthology, A Man and a Woman and Other Stories. You can get a copy of this book at Roven Heights Bookstore in Nigeria or at Vidya Bookstore in Ghana. You can also check out the link in our description box below for all of this information. Noisy Streets also hosts monthly book club meetings every last Saturday of the month. You can find all the information you need in the box below. Okay, let's get back to the episode.
And then I turned 22. And then my body began to undo itself in a way that shocked and stunned me when I got diagnosed with endometriosis. But that was not the only thing happening in my early 20s. While I was in university in Durham, about 19 or 20, I went into this tiny church called Emmanuel for the first time. And in that church that very day, something very unnameable and intangible happened in my spirit, where I just felt like I touched the edge of heaven. I experienced the divine, and I could no longer go back to living and acting like I did not know that there was a God and that I did not hunger to be in communion with him. The problem with hunger is that it's a multifaceted thing. The same way that I was hungry for God, I was hungry for alcohol, I was hungry for men, I was hungry for sex, I was hungry for orgasms, I was hungry for a first-class law degree. And whenever I am desirous of something, it is so easy for me to give myself to it over and over and over. It is so easy for me to choose that thing in a way that reduces the rest of my reality to nothingness. And that's how I was with sex. I pursued it with this kind of unrelenting focus that didn't give way to anything else. But the moment it began to clash against my faith, I was like, there's something happening here. There's a tension here. There is something that is resisting me from connecting with this thing. And so I began to be changed by that. I began to propel and feel tensions in where my faith was taking me to and where my faith was taking me to. But all along this while, I never stopped going to church. I was in church every single Sunday. I was reading my Bible whilst also, Detty Decembering to the max of my capacity. I would get with men that it would be so obvious that they did not see me as a human being and they did not see me as anything other than an object of their sexual pleasure. I would be with men that would sometimes even disregard my reproductive health. I was with someone once who, when we were being intimate, I was hurting from recovering from a yeast infection. And he said, and I quote, "Please let me finish first." When I expressed my discomfort with what was happening. And he was like, "Yeah, sorry for you, but can I bust a nut?" And I remember staring at him and being like, Omo, babe, how did you end up in this position? How did you end up sharing your body with men who are unable to conceive of your well-being? Men who make it so clear that your well-being is secondary to their sexual pleasure. But it wasn't all horrible. I was also with men who took such good care of me, men who were very gentle with me, who made me laugh, who made me read interesting books, who I snuck out of the house during lockdown to go and see, and who gave me expensive bottles of gin. I used to be obsessed with gin, and would take me out, feed me, care for me. And I was constantly stuck between, oh my God, this is so good. Oh my God, what do I do about the fact that maybe my faith pushes up against me seeking pleasure in this way? And all of that came to a head in June of 2021 when I was in such a special and beautiful relationship that started with sex, as all my relationships did. And 6 months into that relationship, as I had been building and developing a relationship with God alongside dating this person, I felt very strongly that the Lord was calling me to stop having sex. And I lost my mind. I was like, No. I was like, why can't we keep doing what we're doing? Go to church on Sunday, read my Bible, pray, but also have amazing sex with my boyfriend. Like, why does one have to cancel for the other? And the feeling I remember most strongly around that time was fear. I was afraid that if I told my partner at the time that we couldn't have sex anymore, that he was going to end my relationship and that he would be right to do it. Remember that seed I spoke about from secondary school? It had actually settled in my mind that any man that said he'd not want to date you anymore because you'd not want to have sex with him was in the right. I truly believed that. And so I was terrified. I loved this man so much. And I was so scared that if I chose my faith over him in that moment, I would lose him, lose the sex, but most importantly, lose that feeling of being desired and being chosen. And I didn't want to do without it. But the problem is that when you have truly felt God in any way, shape, or form, at least for someone like me, it's very difficult to deny that encounter, to deny that experience. More than that, it was so difficult for me to deny the beauty of my faith, that whenever I didn't have anything, whenever I was struggling, that I could always call on God. That whenever I was sick and alone and depressed, when everything else seemed like it was falling beneath me, my faith was solid rock. I could not shake the fact that I loved being a Christian. I loved church. I loved reading the Bible. I loved hanging out with Christians. I loved basking in the love of God. I loved feeling chosen by God. So my faith was not something that I could toss out the window that easily either. What I really wanted was to have two of them at the same time. My mom always says something walk in Jemeji Laba Alade, and means essentially you can't eat your cake and have it. And there was nobody that tried to eat their cake and have it more than me. Whenever I met Christians that were like, oh, they were being sexually pure, I'll be like, actually, in my own kind of Christianity, let me tell you how I do it. Sex positive Christianity. In sex positive Christianity, you can be a Christian, but also have sex. I was going to the ends of the earth to look for any kind of material that would validate me in allowing myself to collide these seemingly impossible forces together. And I was finding them. If you look for anything hard enough, you'll find it. But after a while, I just knew that God was telling me that, babe, come off it now. You too. And that was in 2021. I was 22 and I was torn. I was so scared. I didn't know what it meant to be a young woman who couldn't use her sexuality to navigate the world. It terrified me. And I didn't know what my relationship would look like if we weren't having sex. We're having sex all the time. It was like our favorite activity. And so I became very scared. But the fear of losing him versus the fear of losing my faith won out. And eventually I wrote him a letter and I told him that, see, this is where I'm at. And if you want to go, you can go. It's okay, I understand. And bless his heart, he said he wasn't going anywhere, that we're going to try and figure this out. But trying to figure this out meant trying and failing. We'd make it for like 1 month, sleep up, I will cry. I will go to church, I will cry. And we continued that cycle on and off for about a year. And then in January of 2023, after I moved to Iowa for my master's and really went through a really deep wilderness where my faith truly became the only thing that I had, I knew that it was important for me to undergo this journey of discovering who I was without having access to and relying on sexual pleasure and sexual energy and defining who I am because of sex. It was difficult. It is difficult. I'll be 3 years celibate in January of 2026. And I always tell people this has been the hardest thing I've ever had to do. I have a first-class law degree. I just finished a master's in creative nonfiction from the #1 university for writing in the US. I am running a creative nonfiction foundation, a literary organization. I'm active in my church. I help my mom with her business. I do so many things, and by the grace of God, I do them all very well. But everything in me struggled, especially at the beginning, with celibacy, with not having access to sexual things. I didn't know how much of my sense of self, how much of my sense of even beauty. The first year of being celibate, I felt so ugly. I just felt like I wasn't beautiful anymore, like I wasn't sexy, and all that because nobody was having sex with me. So many times I would have to ask myself, if somebody is not sleeping with you, does that mean you are ugly? What kind of mathematics is that? Like, how do you even construct your entire sense of beauty and desire on this one aspect? And I think it's something that a lot of us fall into without even knowing that these things, like these ephemeral, beautiful, like I can never join people to be like, oh, sex is bad, sex is not enjoyable. No, these are deeply beautiful experiences, but when you make them the bedrock of your identity, and you find yourself in a position where it's something you cannot walk away from, something you cannot see yourself outside of, it calls for a moment of recollection. It asks you to sit down and to reevaluate who you are when it's just you. Being in Iowa by myself in the middle of nowhere, without any lovers, without any boyfriend, so many times I would just sit on the floor and say, who am I? And what do I want? And what is important to me? And when everything else was baseless and I couldn't put a finger on it, the one aspect of my identity that has remained true all through my life is that I'm a child of God. And that I belong and I come from a place that is more than here. And I'm going back to a place that is more than here. And so something like sex cannot be how I define myself and define relationships and define my decisions. It just cannot work. There are unseen things that are greater and that are being demanded of me. And so right now, and people think this often means that people who are celibate do not feel arousal or do not feel sexual desire, and they're in this place where they have such a tight handle on things. Man, we're all human beings. We all have bodies. But something that has happened to me is asking myself, what does my spirit need? Instead of what does just my body need? I've asked myself a lot, what is the difference between indulgence and nourishment? What is the difference between choosing something that feels good now and building something that will feel good eternally? Those are hard questions. And I always tell people, you don't arrive at this place easily. God knows I didn't. But it's a journey that has been worth every single second, worth every single tear, worth all the many, many, many letters and words that I've been writing. I'm writing a whole book about this. And my story is that you can be the kind of girl that is compiling the stats about which tribe in Nigeria has the best redacted on Twitter in 2020, and then be hosting workshops for women who want to explore what it looks like to be celibate in faith literally 3 or 4 years later. My story is that you can go from being that babe to being this babe, and the journey will nourish you and challenge you and make you cry and make you laugh and make you look very closely at yourself, which is the call of every great artist, and I think the call of every great human being. Do not be a stranger to yourself and to the things that are simmering within you. Sit down, look at things, ask yourself questions, be surprised by the answers, lean into uncertainties, lean into your pain and all the difficult things that you cannot name. You will be better for it, and so will your story. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Have a lovely day.
We hope that you enjoyed listening to this episode of What Is Your Story by Noisy Podcast. If you would like to be a guest on the show, click on the link in the description box below. And don't forget to share, to leave a comment, and to like this episode. Also follow us on all of our social media at noisy.podcast. Okay, I'll see you same time next week. Bye.